The flames danced against the midnight sky as Winifred Everett watched her family homestead burn to ash, the heat searing her tear-streaked face. It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Montana, and in the span of a single night, Winnie had lost everything her parents to fever just weeks before, and now their ranch house to a devastating fire caused by an overturned oil lamp. Nothing remained but the clothes on her back, her mother's locket around her neck, and the haunting memory of the life she once knew. "Miss, you all right?" A deep voice came from behind, startling her from her trance. Winnie turned to see a tall man atop a chestnut stallion. The stranger wore trail-worn clothes, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face in the firelight. His presence should have frightened her. A lone woman on the frontier had plenty to fear from unknown men, but something in his concerned gaze calmed her racing heart. "Do I look all right to you, mister?" she replied, her voice hoarse from smoke and crying. The man dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. As he approached, Winnie could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with eyes that reflected the dancing flames. "Name's Ethan Shaw," he said, removing his hat and holding it to his chest respectfully. "Was passing by, saw the fire from the ridge." Winnie nodded numbly, turning back to watch the last wall of her childhood home collapse in a shower of sparks. Winifred Everett. Though there's not much Everett left now, is there? Ethan stood beside her in silence for a long moment, respecting her grief before speaking again. "Did you lose anyone in there?" "No," she whispered. "Already lost them. Fever took Ma and Pa 3 weeks ago. I was trying to make it on my own." The confession broke something inside her. Winnie's shoulders began to shake as the full reality of her situation hit with brutal clarity. She was truly alone now, no family, no home, no possessions, not even a change of clothes. What she didn't expect was the gentle weight that suddenly rested on her head. Ethan had placed his worn cowboy hat atop her ash-streaked hair, the brim shielding her eyes from the glare of the flames. "You have me," he said simply. Winnie looked up at him in surprise, tears still streaming down her face. "I don't even know you," she managed. "No," he agreed with a small smile. "But I'm offering help and seems to me you need it. Got a camp set up about a mile from here. Food, clean water, and I can spare a blanket. Tomorrow we can figure the rest." Winnie hesitated, years of her mother's warnings about strange men echoing in her mind, but her options were non-existent, and something about Ethan Shaw's steady gaze spoke of honor. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. Ethan looked back at the burning ruins. "Because 5 years ago I was the one watching everything burn. Only difference was no one stopped for me." He extended his hand. "Sometimes kindness is all we've got out here." Winnie stared at his outstretched palm, calloused and strong. With the cowboy's hat still atop her head, she made her choice and placed her hand in his. "Just for tonight," she said firmly. Ethan nodded, not pushing further. "Just for tonight," he agreed, leading her to his horse. Neither knew that "just for tonight" would stretch into a journey that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Winnie woke wrapped in a rough wool blanket beside dying embers. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was or why her body ached so terribly. Then reality crashed back: the fire, her lost home, and the stranger who'd offered help when she needed it most. Ethan was already awake, brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. He glanced up when she stirred, offering a nod of acknowledgement. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Coffee's almost ready." Winnie sat up, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. Her once white blouse was streaked with soot, her skirt torn at the hem. Self-consciously, she attempted to smooth her wild hair, only to realize she still wore Ethan's hat. She quickly removed it, holding it out to him. "Thank you," she said, "for the hat and everything else." Ethan waved her off, pouring coffee into a tin cup and passing it to her. "Keep it for now, sun's harsh out here." As Winnie accepted the cup, their fingers briefly touched, sending an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. She quickly looked away, focusing instead on the vast Montana landscape around them. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, the morning sky painted in shades of pink and gold. "So," Ethan said after a silence filled only by the occasional bird call, What's your plan now? Winnie stared into her coffee. I don't know, she admitted. The nearest town is Willow Creek, about 20 miles east. I suppose I could try to find work there. As what? Ethan asked, not unkindly. I can sew, cook decent enough, maybe find work as a maid or in a boarding house. She lifted her chin. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Shaw. Never suggested you were, he replied, and it's just Ethan. He poured himself more coffee, considering something before speaking again. I'm headed to Copper Canyon. Got a job waiting as a ranch hand at the Triple R. Owner's an old friend of my pa's. Winnie recognized the name. Copper Canyon was a growing cattle town about 50 miles northwest, known for its mining operations as well as ranching. That's good for you, she said cautiously, unsure where he was going with this information. Copper Canyon's got a hotel, general store, couple saloons, and a dress shop, Ethan continued. More work opportunities than Willow Creek. I could take you there if you'd like. Winnie narrowed her eyes. And what would you want in return, Mr. Shaw? His brow furrowed at her implication. Nothing, just offering safe passage. These trails can be dangerous for a woman alone. I can take care of myself, she said reflexively, even as she recognized the foolishness of the claim. Last night had proven just how vulnerable she truly was. No doubt, Ethan said, surprising her. But even the strongest of us need help sometimes. He stood, gathering his cooking supplies. Offer stands. I'm leaving in an hour. You're welcome to ride with me to Copper Canyon, or I can point you toward Willow Creek. Your choice. As he busied himself breaking camp, Winnie weighed her options. Willow Creek was closer, but smaller, with fewer opportunities. Copper Canyon was further but offered more possibilities for a fresh start, and while she barely knew Ethan Shaw, he had been nothing but respectful since finding her. If I go with you to Copper Canyon, she said finally, I want to be clear that I'm not. She trailed off, embarrassed. I understand, Ethan replied seriously. My offer is just safe passage, Miss Everett, nothing more. Winnie studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then I accept. Thank you. Ethan's mouth quirked in a small smile. You might want to wait on thanks until you've spent 3 days riding with me. I've been told I'm not the most talkative traveling companion. Despite everything, Winnie found herself returning his smile. After what I've been through, Mr. Shaw, a little quiet sounds like a blessing. By midday, they had returned to the charred remains of the Everett homestead. Winnie insisted on searching through the ruins, hoping to salvage anything from her previous life. Ethan helped, careful not to disturb her as she moved methodically through the blackened timbers. In what had been her parents' bedroom, Winnie unearthed a small metal box. Its contents miraculously preserved a few photographs, her father's pocket watch, and her mother's wedding ring. In the kitchen area, they found some cast iron cookware, scorched but still usable. Everything else was gone. Not much to show for a life, Winnie said softly, clutching the small box to her chest. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's more than I saved from my place, he said. Sometimes memories are the only things we get to keep. Winnie looked up at him, struck by the understanding in his eyes. You mentioned you lost everything too. What happened? Ethan's face tightened slightly. Cattle rustlers. They didn't like that my pa reported them to the sheriff. Came one night, torched our place. Pa died trying to save the livestock. He shrugged, a practiced gesture meant to downplay old pain. That was over in Wyoming territory near Cheyenne. I'm sorry, Winnie said, recognizing in him the same hollow grief she carried. It was a long time ago, he replied. You ready to move on? The double meaning wasn't lost on her. With a final look at the ruins of her childhood home, Winnie nodded. Yes, I'm ready. They set out northward, Winnie riding behind Ethan on his stallion. The close proximity made her initially uncomfortable, but as the miles stretched on, she grew accustomed to the rhythm of the horse and the solid presence of the cowboy before her. Their first day passed largely in silence, broken only by occasional comments about the terrain or brief stops to rest the horse. By evening, they had made good progress, and Ethan found a suitable camping spot near a small creek. We'll reach the Blackwater River tomorrow, he explained as he prepared a simple dinner of beans and salt pork. Have to cross at the ford. After that, it's another day and a half to Copper Canyon, when he helped set up camp, grateful for the activity. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire, the vastness of the Montana wilderness surrounding them. Stars emerged in a dazzling display above, more brilliant than Winnie had ever noticed before. "It's beautiful," she said, gazing upward. "Even after everything, there's still beauty in the world." Ethan followed her gaze. "That's what keeps us going, I think, finding beauty where we can." Something in his tone made Winnie look at him more closely. In the firelight, his features were softer, less guarded. She noticed for the first time the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, the small scar along his jawline, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "How long have you been on the trail?" she asked. "Since I was 20, he replied. 5 years now, no home." Ethan prodded the fire with a stick. "Had a few temporary places, nothing permanent." He glanced at her. "What about you? Been at that homestead all your life?" "Since I was 10, Winnie said. "Before that, we lived in St. Louis. Pa was a bookkeeper, but he always dreamed of having his own land. When the opportunity came to claim a homestead, he moved us west." She smiled at the memory. "Ma was furious at first. She was a city woman through and through, but she grew to love it too eventually." "They sound like good people," Ethan said. "They were," Winnie agreed, her throat tightening. "The best." They fell into companionable silence, each lost in memories. After a while, Ethan spoke again. "What will you do in Copper Canyon?" "Really?" Winnie considered the question. "Survive," she said finally. "And then, build something new, I suppose. That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Keep building, even after everything falls apart." Ethan's gaze held hers across the fire. "Yes," he said softly. "That's exactly what we do." That night, as Winnie lay wrapped in her blanket looking up at the stars, she realized something had shifted within her. The devastating loss was still there, a wound that would take time to heal. But alongside, it was something else, a tiny seed of hope, planted by a cowboy who had once lost everything too. The next day dawned clear and bright. They broke camp efficiently, falling into an easy rhythm together. As they rode, the silence between them grew more comfortable, punctuated by occasional conversation about the landscape or memories from their pasts. Ethan told her about growing up in Wyoming, learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk. Winnie shared stories of her mother teaching her to read from classic literature, her father's patient lessons in arithmetic and bookkeeping. "He wanted me to have skills beyond just being someone's wife," she explained. "Said a woman with education always had options." "Wise man," Ethan commented. "My ma was similar. Could outride most men and kept the ranch books better than any banker. Pa used to say she was the brains and he was just the muscle." By midday, they reached the Blackwater River, a wide, rushing body of water that cut through the landscape. The ford Ethan had mentioned was visible by the flattened banks and shallow-looking water, though the current still looked strong. "It's higher than I expected," Ethan said with a frown. "Spring runoff must be stronger this year. Is it safe to cross?" Winnie asked, eyeing the swirling water nervously. "Should be, if we're careful." Ethan dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. "Let me check the depth first." He waded in cautiously, testing the river bottom with each step. The water rose to mid-thigh at the deepest point, and the current pulled strongly, but he made it across and back without difficulty. "We'll be fine," he assured her. "Horse is strong enough to handle it. Just hold on tight to me." Winnie nodded and they remounted. As they entered the water, she instinctively wrapped her arms around Ethan's waist, pressing close against his back. The horse moved cautiously, picking its way across the rocky riverbed. Halfway across, the stallion stepped into a deeper section. The sudden drop caused it to falter, and the current pushed forcefully against its legs. Winnie gasped as cold water splashed up to her knees. "Steady," Ethan murmured, to the horse or to her. Winnie wasn't sure. His body was tense beneath her hands, but his voice remained calm. "Almost there." The horse regained its footing and pushed forward. A few more tense moments passed before they finally reached the opposite bank, both of them soaked to the waist but safe. Once on dry land, Ethan helped Winnie down. "You all right?" he asked, his hands still on her arms, eyes scanning her face with concern. "Yes," she said, breathless from the crossing and the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you." They stood like that for a moment longer than necessary before Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should find a place to dry out before continuing," he said, leading the horse up the bank. They found a sunny clearing nearby and laid out their wet clothing to dry while maintaining proper modesty, Winnie behind some bushes and Ethan on the other side of their small camp. The unexpected intimacy of the situation left a strange tension in the air when they reconvened, now in drier attire. As they prepared to continue their journey, Winnie noticed Ethan wincing slightly as he adjusted the saddle. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head dismissively. "Old injury. Acts up sometimes when it gets wet." "From the fire," she guessed. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Got trapped under a beam trying to get to Pa. Doctor said I was lucky not to lose the leg." Without thinking, Winnie reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You're very brave, Ethan Shaw." His eyes met hers, surprise evident in them, followed by something warmer. "Not brave," he said quietly. "Just stubborn, like someone else I'm getting to know." The compliment, if that's what it was, brought unexpected heat to Winnie's cheeks. She withdrew her hand quickly and turned away, busying herself with gathering her few possessions. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they headed northwest. The open plains gave way to more rugged terrain, with scattered pine forests and rocky outcroppings that hinted at the mountains beyond. By evening, they had made good progress despite the delay at the river. Ethan found a sheltered spot for camp, and they fell into what was already becoming a familiar routine, setting up, preparing a simple meal, sitting by the fire as darkness fell. "Tell me about Copper Canyon," Winnie said as they ate. "What's it like, growing?" Ethan replied. "When I was there 2 years ago, it was just a small settlement general store, saloon, a handful of houses. Now I hear they've got a proper hotel, church, even a schoolhouse." He smiled slightly. "Still rough around the edges, but civilized enough that a lady like yourself won't feel too out of place." Winnie raised an eyebrow. "A lady like myself. You know what I mean," Ethan said. "You've got education, refinement. You're not just some trail-worn cowhand." "And what's wrong with being a trail-worn cowhand?" she challenged, a hint of teasing in her voice. Ethan looked at her in surprise, then laughed, a full, rich sound that transformed his usually serious face. "Not a thing, Miss Everett. Not a single thing." Winnie smiled in return, enjoying the way his features softened when he laughed. "Do you ever think about settling down?" she asked. Finding a place to call home again, the question sobered him slightly. "Used to think I never would," he admitted. After losing everything, the idea of building something just to risk losing it again. He shook his head, seemed foolish. "And now," she pressed gently, Ethan's eyes met hers across the fire. "Now I'm not so sure," he said quietly. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition of shared pain and perhaps shared hope. Winnie looked away first, suddenly aware of how quickly she was growing attached to this man she barely knew. "We should get some rest," she said, breaking the tension. "Sounds like we have another full day of travel tomorrow." Ethan nodded, and they prepared for sleep, each on opposite sides of the fire. As Winnie lay watching the stars through the tree branches above, she could sense Ethan's presence across the camp, a reassuring anchor in a world that had become suddenly unmoored. She realized she still wore his hat, having grown accustomed to its weight on her head. The simple gesture from that first night, placing his hat on her head and offering his help, had been the first kindness in a series of many. And with each passing hour in his company, the initial wariness she'd felt was giving way to something else entirely, something both terrifying and exhilarating. "You have me," he had said. Simple words spoken by a stranger, yet they had become a lifeline she never expected. Morning brought a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a cool wind whipped across the landscape as they packed up camp. "Storm's coming," Ethan observed, eyeing the sky with concern. "We should try to reach Copper Canyon before it hits." They rode hard through the morning, the terrain becoming increasingly challenging as they approached the foothills that gave Copper Canyon its name. By midday, the distant rumble of thunder urged them to greater speed, and Winnie could feel Ethan's tension in the set of his shoulders as he pushed the horse as fast as was safe on the rocky trail. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead," he explained during a brief rest. If we can't outrun the storm, we can shelter there. The first heavy raindrops began to fall just as the small wooden structure came into view, nestled among a stand of pines. By the time they reached it, the rain was coming down in sheets, driven by a fierce wind that cut through their clothing. Ethan helped Winnie dismount and led the horse to a small lean-to attached to the shack. They hurried inside, finding the single-room cabin dusty but intact. A stone fireplace stood against one wall, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed provided basic comforts. Used by cowhands during roundup, Ethan explained as he shook rain from his coat. Should have supplies. He was right. A search revealed a small store of firewood, some basic provisions, even a few candles and matches. Before long, Ethan had a fire going, casting warm light throughout the small space. Winnie stood close to the flames, trying to stop the shivering that had taken hold during their rain-soaked ride. Her teeth chattered despite her efforts to still them. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Ethan said, concern evident in his voice. He rummaged through his saddlebag and pulled out a clean, if somewhat worn, shirt. "It's not much, but it's dry. I'll step outside while you change." "In this downpour," Winnie protested. "You'll catch your death." They stared at each other, the dilemma clear. Propriety demanded privacy, but practicality argued against anyone going back into the storm. "Turn around," Winnie finally said, making her decision, "and I'll do the same when it's your turn." Ethan nodded and faced the wall. Winnie changed quickly, removing her sodden dress and undergarments with trembling fingers. Ethan's shirt fell to her mid-thigh, the fabric soft from many washings and carrying a scent that she had come to associate with him: horses, leather, and something indefinably masculine. "I'm decent," she said when finished. Ethan turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in his clothing, hair falling in damp waves around her shoulders. He quickly averted his gaze. "Your turn," she said, turning to face the wall. She listened to the rustle of fabric as he changed, imagination filling in what she could not see. When he told her she could turn around, she found him in dry trousers and an undershirt that revealed more of his physique than she had seen before: broad shoulders, strong arms, and the hint of scarring on his left leg, where his old injury must have been. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the pounding of rain on the roof. "Looks like we'll be here a while," Ethan finally said, moving to check the provisions more thoroughly. "Storm's setting in for the long haul." Winnie nodded, watching as he inventoried their supplies. "Will we still reach Copper Canyon tomorrow?" "Depends on how long this lasts," he replied. "Trails will be muddy, might take an extra day." The thought should have concerned her: another day delaying her arrival, another day of uncertainty. Instead, Winnie found herself oddly relieved at the prospect of more time with Ethan before they reached civilization, and their paths potentially diverged. They passed the afternoon making the best of their situation, spreading their wet clothing to dry, preparing a simple meal from the lined shack stores, and listening to the storm rage outside. As evening approached, the rain showed no signs of letting up, and the temperature dropped further. Ethan added more wood to the fire and turned to Winnie with an apologetic expression. "There's only the one bed," he said, nodding toward the narrow cot. "You take it, I'll manage on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," Winnie replied. "That floor is hard as stone, and your leg already pains you." "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her. "As have I," she countered. "We can share the bed. It's large enough if we're careful." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Miss Everett, I don't think..." "It's Winnie," she interrupted. "And I trust you, Ethan. I wouldn't have come this far with you if I didn't." She met his gaze steadily. "We're 2 adults caught in a storm. Nothing improper need happen." After a long moment, Ethan nodded. "If you're certain." "I am," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. As darkness fell outside, they prepared for sleep, the small cabin growing chilly despite the fire. They arranged themselves carefully on the narrow bed, back to back, with as much space between them as the small mattress allowed, which wasn't much. Winnie lay awake, acutely aware of Ethan's warmth behind her, the sound of his breathing, the scent of his shirt that still enveloped her. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the trees. Ethan, she whispered after a while. Are you awake? Yes, came his quiet reply. Thank you for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did. She felt him shift slightly. You'd have managed, he said. You're stronger than you know, Winnie. The use of her given name sent a small thrill through her. Maybe, she conceded, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out alone. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's shutters, making Winnie flinch. Almost instinctively, she moved closer to Ethan's solid presence. Sorry, she murmured. It's all right, he said, his voice low. Storms can be unsettling, especially after what you've been through. It's not just the storm, Winnie admitted, emboldened by the darkness. It's everything. My parents, the fire, not knowing what comes next. Sometimes it feels like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing but darkness below. Ethan was quiet for so long that Winnie thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. Even in the dim firelight, she could see the understanding in his eyes. I know that feeling, he said softly. After I lost my family, I wandered for months just trying to outrun the pain, took jobs that didn't matter, rode trails that led nowhere. His hand found hers beneath the blanket, warm and calloused. The darkness doesn't last forever, Winnie. I promise you that. Winnie's eyes filled with tears at his words and the gentle pressure of his hand around hers. How can you be so sure? She whispered. Because even in the darkest times, there are moments of light, he replied, like finding someone who understands. Someone who sees your pain and doesn't turn away from it. Their faces were close now, breaths mingling in the cold air of the cabin. Winnie wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on hers, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, surprise and desire evident in their expressions. I shouldn't have done that, Ethan said, though he made no move to pull away. I wanted you to, Winnie admitted, her heart pounding. They stared at each other in the firelight, the storm forgotten as something new and powerful grew between them. Without words, they came together again, this time with greater urgency, hands exploring, bodies pressing closer as the narrow bed creaked beneath them. Ethan pulled back first, his breathing ragged. Winnie, I don't want to take advantage, she placed her fingers against his lips. You're not, she assured him. I know my own mind, Ethan Shaw, and right now all I want is you. The last of his restraint fell away at her words. Their next kiss deepened, hands wandering with more purpose, clothing discarded until there was nothing between them but shared breath and racing hearts. In the small line shack, as rain pounded the roof and wind howled through the pines, Winnie and Ethan found in each other what they had both lost: a sense of home, of belonging, of future possibility where before there had been only grief and uncertainty. Afterward, they lay entwined, Winnie's head resting on Ethan's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. I never expected this, she murmured, tracing a pattern on his skin. When you found me by the ruins of my home, I thought you were just a kind stranger passing through. Ethan's fingers combed gently through her hair. And now, Winnie raised her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability beneath his usual steady gaze. Now I think perhaps you're the reason I survived the fire. Not just because you helped me, but because you showed me there could be a future beyond it. His expression softened, and he pulled her closer. When I placed my hat on your head that night and said you have me, I meant it as comfort to a woman in distress, he admitted. I had no idea how much I'd come to mean those words. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the storm still raging outside but powerless against the warmth they had found together. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape, mud-slicked trails, swollen streams, and fallen branches scattered across their path. But it also brought clarity to what had been building between them since that first night by the burning homestead. As they prepared to leave the lined shack, Ethan took Winnie's hands in his. Before we reach Copper Canyon, I need to know what you want to happen next, he said. Last night was. He trailed off, searching for words. Everything, Winnie finished for him. It was everything. Relief flooded his features. Yes, he agreed, but when we reach town, you'll have choices to make. I won't hold you to anything said in the heat of moment. Winnie stepped closer, placing her palm against his cheek. What if my choice is you, she asked. What if I want to see where this leads? The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Then I'd say we have a lot to figure out, but we'll do it together. He bent to kiss her, a promise sealed between them. They reached Copper Canyon the following day, the small but growing town nestled in a valley between copper-rich hills. Despite the muddy Main Street and weather-beaten buildings, Winnie thought it looked like paradise after their journey. Ethan took her to the hotel first, securing a room for her while maintaining proper appearances now that they were in civilization. The hotel owner, a bustling woman named Mrs. Holloway, took one look at Winnie's borrowed clothes and situation and immediately offered both a job and additional clothing. Lost everything in a fire, did you? Poor dear. My sister went through similar back in '65. You can help with the rooms and dining service. And don't you worry about a thing, we take care of our own here in Copper Canyon. Over the next weeks, Winnie settled into life in the frontier town while Ethan began his work at the R Ranch. They maintained propriety in public, but everyone noticed the way the quiet cowboy lit up whenever Winnie entered a room, how she always saved the best piece of pie for him when he came to the hotel restaurant. 6 months after arriving in Copper Canyon, on a crisp autumn evening with leaves turning gold on the surrounding hills, Ethan proposed. They stood on the hotel's back porch, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant orange and pink. I'm not a wealthy man, he said, holding out a simple gold band, but I can build us a home, Winnie, a place that's ours. I don't need wealth, she replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. I just need you. They married 2 weeks later in the town's small church. Winnie wore a blue dress that Mrs. Holloway had helped her make, and Ethan wore a new shirt and his best trousers. But most importantly, as they said their vows, Winnie wore Ethan's cowboy hat, the same one he had placed on her head that first night, now adorned with a simple ribbon. As they walked out of the church to the cheers of the townspeople who had quickly embraced them both, Ethan leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Remember when I said you have me? I meant it for always." Winnie smiled up at her husband, the painful memory of the fire now balanced by the joy of what had come after. "And you have me, Ethan Shaw, for always." 2 years later, their homestead on the outskirts of Copper Canyon was complete, a sturdy cabin with room to grow, a small barn, and the beginning of what would someday be a prosperous ranch. Ethan had saved every penny from his work at the R, and Winnie had contributed her earnings from the hotel until they could purchase the land and build their dream. On the porch of their new home, Winnie stood with their infant daughter, Rose, in her arms while Ethan worked in the corral with a new colt. The setting sun gilded everything in golden light, reminding Winnie of that terrible night when flames had taken everything she thought mattered. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan looked up from his work and smiled at his wife and child. He crossed to them, placing his hat on Winnie's head in a gesture that had become their private symbol of love and protection. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around them both. "More than I ever thought possible," Winnie replied truthfully. She had lost everything in the fire, but gained a love stronger than the flames that had forged it, a love built on shared understanding, mutual respect, and the simple promise of a cowboy who had placed his hat on her head and said, "You have me."